here from FS Securities, a stockbroking firm on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And as usual, every Monday morning I go through what happened globally around the world for the last few weeks and try to forecast from technical and fundamental indicators what we may see this coming weeks. I show you how investors and traders can make money on our stock market. And by the way, if you like the presentation, we would really appreciate some feedback. First of all, over the week and from around the globe, we start with the Dow Jones, and we can see that last week the Dow was up 0.4%, 120 points. However, when you combine the 2 weeks together to have a better perspective, we see that the increase was only 84 points or 0.3%, which tells us that 2 weeks ago we had a decline in the market and last week was a positive week. The Nasdaq over the last 2 weeks was actually up 0.8% despite a major increase last week. The S&P 500, which is the broader index, was up 0.9%. The US dollar, we're actually showing some weakness over the last 2 weeks. We've seen a decline of 1%, which of course pushed the Australian dollar against the US up by 1.7%. And by the way, this morning the Australian dollar is trading at around 68.8 US cents. And when we talk about the Australian dollar, we have of course a change in the Australian dollar, because last week sometimes we've seen the Australian dollar above 69 US cents. In terms of commodities, we're looking at gold. Last week we've seen an increase in the price of gold per ounce, US ounce, $16 US per ounce. However, when you look at the last 2 weeks, the actually increase was only $10. Silver was down 0.6% over the last 2 weeks, despite the major increase last week. West Texas crude oil had a good 2 weeks, an increase of nearly 8%. And by the way, if you're interested with any of the other commodities, all you have to do is write to us and we'll let you know how to trade these other commodities. Now, the weekly forecast, what we can see here, the Australian market, which is driven by the gauge, which is the ASX200, the XJO, is governed to a greater extent by the financials and the materials. When both of these sectors, the main sectors, are up or down, the market usually reacts accordingly. Over the last 2 weeks, the financials were down 0.7% and the materials were up 1.3%, thanks to the increase in the price of iron ore. However, we've seen that the banks had a major effect on the overall market, and the ASX200 was down by 1.5%, despite we've seen 0.5% increase last week. When we look at the last 2 weeks together, we don't really just rely on just 1 week. We like to see the big picture. Now, in terms of stocks, we can go down the list here. We have a lot more blue sells last week, but a lot more red sells the week over the last 2 weeks combined. With the exception of BHP, had a good rise over the last 2 weeks of 2.9%, affected mainly by the 5.3% increase last week, which tells us straight away that 2 weeks ago BHP was in decline. When we look at CIMIC, that's the old Leighton Holdings, we've seen 2% increase over the last 2 weeks. QBE, Rio and Santos all had 2 good weeks collectively. On the negative side, NAB continues to be declining, and Bramble, we've seen Bramble down 23% over the last 2 weeks. Most of it the decline 2 weeks ago. Newcrest Mines had also a decline of nearly 9% over the last 2 weeks. Telstra was also down by 5%. If you want a copy of this slide, all you have to do is write to us. We like to look at volume. Volume is actually a very leading indicator, and we've seen that the volume has been increasing slightly over the last 5 days, but nowhere near what happened about 10 days ago or about 7-8 days ago. We've had a major increase in volume and a major decline in the price of stocks, and we've seen a lot more declines than advances. However, when you look at last week, the last 5 days, it's pretty even. 3 days out of 5 we had the advances exceeding the declines. However, when we see the declines, were actually major declines when the declines exceeded advances. Now you look at the big picture, this is actually week by week. Last week and the week before, we've had more declines than advances. However, a slight improvement in the market last week, where the advances actually were better than the week before. The mechanical system that we have designed allows us to look at week by week how the indicators are driven by what happens in the market. The Dow last week had a major increase. As you can see, bull for the investor, the conservative trader, the aggressive trader, and the very aggressive trader. Gold was only bullish for the aggressive and the very aggressive trader. Crude oil, that's the West Texas crude oil, bullish for the conservative trader as well as the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader. So these are the indicators that tells us what we are likely to see this coming day or week. However, of course, some of the leading indicators can actually give us a signal. However, the lagging indicators sometimes take some time to change. So it has to be taken into consideration. In terms of the chart, we can see here the weekly chart. We've had a good week last week, again reaching an all-time high at one stage, but never really finished at that high. Looking at Friday, Saturday trade, this is a daily chart. We've had a major increase to start with. However, the market finished exactly where it opened. Slight improvement, but obviously quite below the all-time high. Now looking at our market, the All Ordinary and the ASX200, bearish for the very aggressive trader and neutral for the investor and the conservative and the aggressive trader. Energy, bullish across all type of traders and investors, and gold, bearish across the conservative and the aggressive and the very aggressive trader. Material seems to be very, very bullish at the moment because, as I mentioned earlier, the price of the iron ore has been going up the last few weeks. This is a chart, the weekly chart. You can see a very small candle over the week in comparison to a major drop in the market the week before. Looking at the daily chart, we've had over the last 5 days the market has been hovering between 6,700 and 6,050. The market this morning is likely to open higher, and we may actually get back to the all-time that we've seen on Friday. It may even exceed it. We had a 23 points indicators in terms of what the futures are indicating, if you believe the futures. Now looking at our stocks, NAB again continues to be very bearish over 3 weeks. As you can see, very strong bearish. And when we look at the bullish indicators, Woodside Petroleum happens to be the best of all the stocks. As you can see here, bullish for the investor and the conservative trader, the aggressive trader, and the very aggressive trader. In terms of other stocks, BHP bullish, as you can see here, but neutral for the investor. And look at Rio, again the same situation for Rio, bullish across the 3 traders, but neutral for the long-term investor. Again, if you want a copy of this chart or this particular slide, we'll give it to you if you write to us. Now we look at the volume as an important leading indicator. And what we've seen, nothing appeared on the high side, on the top 50 bullish side. However, we see two companies that had major declines and also increase in the volume. That is a major sign to us when the market drops over the week by a reasonable percentage and you see a major increase in the volume. So therefore the sellers are really playing the game and the buyers are on the back foot. That tells us that we need to actually look into this company, GPT Group, and also we may have a look at Newcrest Mine as well. In terms of our CFDs, I'm glad to say that we had a very good week last week. We managed to get into the ASX200, the XJA200, and we did make some good money on it. We managed to actually reduce our losses from previous week on the British pound, and also we've had some good week on Iluka, which now is sitting at around $170 profit, which actually that's nearly 80% profit on Iluka. And by the way, our total return on our capital now has gone up from 21% last week to 39% this week. So that is all from us here at FS Securities. And by the way, if you have any questions, here are the indicators where to write to us. george@fssecurities.com.au, and if you're ringing from overseas, you put 61, you don't need the 0, so it becomes 61-411-259526. That's my mobile number. I'm available to receive your calls almost 11-12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Have a good week and happy trading.